He was a billionaire no one could touch, polished, ruthless, admired. But the day he rolled down his tinted window and locked eyes with a barefoot woman begging with 2 children, something inside him shattered. Because he knew her. Knew every scar on her face. She was the woman he once planned to marry. The one who vanished without a word 20 years ago. Now she was homeless, and he was the reason. As his driver asked if they should move on, Adrian Hayes whispered, "Stop the car." But what he did next didn't just stop traffic, it rewrote everything he thought he knew about love, betrayal, and family. What would you do if the love of your life reappeared, and she wasn't alone? Adrian Hayes had crossed countless intersections in his life, metaphorical and literal. But nothing could have prepared him for the stoplight at Westbourne and 8th, where the glittering illusion of success crashed into a truth he'd buried long ago. The Maybach's interior was silent except for the faint hum of the engine and the rhythmic click of his assistant typing on a tablet beside him. Adrian wasn't even supposed to take this route. It was a detour due to a closed bridge. Yet fate had a way of guiding you exactly where you swore you'd never return. As the light turned red, his eyes wandered across the smudged city glass and halted on a scene so jarring it eclipsed every deal, every number, every polished award lining his glass office. A woman stood on the corner in ragged clothes, clutching 2 small children close, a cardboard sign trembling in her fingers. "Anything helps, God bless." Her hair was streaked with ash and sun, her face gaunt, and her back hunched from carrying years no one had noticed. But Adrian noticed. His breath caught in his throat as his heart forgot how to beat in rhythm. Because her face, underneath the grime and pain, was unmistakable. It was Lily. The woman who vanished 2 decades ago. The one he'd loved more than he could admit, even to himself. The woman who was supposed to be his future, until she disappeared the night before they were meant to run away from their dead-end lives and never look back. But now here she was, barefoot, broken, with 2 children no older than 7 clutching the hem of her oversized sweater. Adrian's knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of his seat. His driver glanced at him through the rearview mirror, confused by the sudden change in his boss's expression. "Sir?" he asked. But Adrian didn't respond. His entire body was frozen in time. For years he had believed she had left him. That she chose someone else, some other life. That he was never good enough. That belief had turned to rage, and that rage became fuel for an empire. Every tower he built, every competitor he crushed, was layered on a foundation of abandonment and betrayal. And now, she was standing 3 feet from his car window, with eyes hollowed by something far deeper than time. Adrian rolled the window down a few inches, and for a moment the cold air of the street mixed with the sterile climate-controlled luxury inside his car. Lily turned her head at the faint movement. Their eyes met. Hers widened, not in recognition, but in raw human fear, the kind that came from years of hiding, not knowing who might notice. She quickly looked away. She didn't see him. Not really. Not yet. To her, he was just another rich man in another expensive car. A blur behind tinted glass. But to him, she was the ghost of every what-if that haunted him during lonely nights in penthouse suites. Before he could stop himself, Adrian flung the door open and stepped out onto the cracked concrete. His assistant called after him, confused and alarmed, but he didn't hear it. The honk of a passing car was the only sound he registered, followed by the sound of his own shoes hitting the pavement with a thud that felt louder than anything in his memory. Lily instinctively pulled her children behind her, her face twisting in panic as he approached. She still didn't recognize him. Or maybe she did, and just didn't believe it. "Lily," he said softly, barely trusting his own voice. She blinked, stepped back, eyes darting for an escape route. He raised both hands, palms out, trying to slow the moment down. "It's me, Adrian." For a breathless second, her expression wavered. And then, the faintest tremble of her lips. A gasp that never fully formed. The name hung between them like a thread pulled from the past. The light turned green behind them. Cars honked. Time waited. Lily stared at him like he was a ghost that had stepped out of a dream she thought she'd buried long ago. And the children. They clung tighter, watching the man their mother wouldn't look away from, even as tears welled in her eyes. Adrian had conquered boardrooms, won battles in silence, and made kings kneel in hostile takeovers. But nothing prepared him for this moment, this intersection of fate and failure. He had just recognized the woman who had once meant everything to him. But the real question was, had she ever stopped thinking of him? And if she had, why was she here, in the cold, with children that might very well be his? Before Adrian Hayes ever sat in boardrooms where fortunes shifted with a signature, before the world hailed him as a visionary and whispered about his impenetrable walls, he was just a boy in a crumbling neighborhood with fists full of ambition and nowhere to put them. He was 17 when he met Lily, half wild, half wounded, and all heart. She was the only one who ever saw past his temper and his tattered shoes. While the world told Adrian he was destined for prison or an early grave, Lily told him he was meant to build things that lasted. They met behind the old train yard, where kids like them lit fires in oil drums to stay warm. She had a laugh that cut through winter and eyes that made you forget where you were. He never told her that she was the only reason he stopped stealing and started dreaming. She never told him what she feared most at home. They shared everything else: cheap burgers, whispered hopes, bruises they didn't speak of, and one battered journal filled with blueprints for a life they hadn't lived yet. In its pages, they sketched out dreams, a business they'd build together, a life they'd escape to, a city where no one knew their names or their pain. They had nothing, but they had each other. And that, Adrian thought, was enough. Until the day she vanished. They were supposed to leave on a Tuesday. Adrian had stolen enough cash from his part-time mechanic job to cover the bus tickets. Lily had packed what little she had, 3 shirts, a notebook, and a photograph of her mother before things got bad. They had kissed that night with the intensity of people who believed the next morning would be the start of everything. But when he showed up at the old parking lot with 2 bus passes in his back pocket and hope burning in his chest, Lily was gone. No note. No call. Just a cold wind and a silence that cracked something deep inside him. At first, he panicked. Checked every alley, asked everyone they both knew. But no one had seen her. Her phone rang twice, then went dead. Her apartment was abandoned, door left open, drawers pulled out, the walls hollow like something terrible had passed through. That night, Adrian waited at the bus station until morning, clutching both tickets, convinced she'd come. But the sun rose, and so did the truth: she had left him. He tried to convince himself she'd changed her mind, found someone better, or maybe she realized the world was too broken for them to fix it together. What hurt most wasn't just that she left, it was that she did it without a goodbye. That was the night Adrian stopped being soft. He buried his love for Lily under a mountain of steel and silence. He burned the journal they shared and took the one blueprint he'd drawn for a startup, then used it to claw his way into the lowest tier of the business world. Within a year, he'd landed an internship. By 24, he'd built his first tech company and sold it for millions. By 30, he was a mogul. But he never loved again. Women came and went, models, influencers, heiresses, but none of them ever reached him. His partners thought he was just cold. The media said he was private. But Adrian knew the truth. No one could get close to a place already occupied by a ghost. Now, staring into Lily's worn face on that street corner, it wasn't anger he felt. It was confusion, grief, questions he'd buried under deals, and digits roared back louder than ever. Why did she leave? Why didn't she say goodbye? Who hurt her so badly that she chose to disappear completely rather than reach out to the one person who would have torn down the world to find her? And those children clinging to her sleeves, were they hers? Or were they theirs? The shape of the little boy's jaw looked unsettlingly familiar. And the girl's eyes, they carried the same fire Lily once had, and the same defiance Adrian wore on his own face as a child. The possibility that they were his kids made his knees weak. If it was true, if she had kept this from him, then everything he'd built was built on a lie. But it wasn't the potential betrayal that haunted him. It was the thought that she might have been in danger all this time while he lived in luxury, clueless and safe. He had the resources now to find answers, to dig beneath the disappearance. He needed to know the truth, not just for closure, but because if there was even a sliver of chance those children were his, then he had missed a decade of their lives. And for a man who had spent 20 years building a legacy to outrun his pain, realizing he might have also abandoned the very people he once swore to protect cracked something open inside him that no amount of money could repair. In that instant, Adrian didn't see himself as the titan of an empire. He saw a man whose story was never finished. Because the woman who disappeared had finally returned, but not as the girl he remembered. She was someone else now. And she had secrets buried deeper than he'd ever dared to dig. Adrian didn't sleep that night. He sat in the corner of his penthouse suite with the lights off, watching the skyline burn gold and black through walls of glass, the city's pulse beating against his own fractured thoughts. Lily was alive. Lily had children. Lily had vanished not by choice, but possibly by force. That possibility ate at him like acid. It made him feel helpless, a word he hadn't used to describe himself since the day he started building his empire. He had to know. Not tomorrow. Not through lawyers. Not filtered through the sanitizing lens of assistants or PR agents. He needed the raw truth. So he went to the only place that still connected him to the boy he once was, Briar Hollow. The neighborhood hadn't changed much. Still cracked sidewalks, graffiti-tagged brick walls, and the same corner store that sold expired milk and warm soda. But one face hadn't aged a day in spirit. Dee, Lily's old neighbor and closest friend back then. Dee was older now, grayer, slower in step but still razor-sharp in the eyes. She opened the door with suspicion, but the second she saw Adrian's face, her expression faltered. "You're back," she muttered, voice hoarse, then softened to a whisper. "Took you long enough." He didn't need to ask if she knew where Lily had been. The guilt in her eyes said everything. They sat in her cramped living room, the air thick with decades of smoke and secrets. Dee lit a cigarette with shaking hands and told him the truth in fragments. The night Lily was supposed to run away with Adrian, someone had found out. A man named Victor Darrow, one of Adrian's early enemies, a street-level dealer with deep ties to the kind of people who didn't just threaten. They acted. Victor had blamed Lily for helping Adrian escape their world. He wanted to send a message. When Lily's brother was beaten within an inch of his life, she got the warning loud and clear: disappear or more would follow. She tried to reach Adrian that night, Dee said, voice cracking. But someone had already intercepted her call. They took her phone. They ransacked her apartment. She fled with the clothes on her back and one thing on her mind: keeping Adrian alive. Dee told him Lily was hidden for months in shelters, then relocated under a fake name with the help of a women's refuge network. She couldn't send letters. She couldn't risk contact. And when she found out she was pregnant, Adrian nearly stood up. Pregnant? Dee paused there, searching his face. "Yes, they're yours," she said plainly. "Both of them. Twins." Adrian felt like the floor cracked beneath him. Years of carefully constructed detachment began to collapse under the weight of revelation. The children weren't just a maybe. They were his. And he had never met them. Never held them. Never told them their names were once written in a journal that burned with the rest of his innocence. "Why didn't you come to me?" he whispered, more to himself than to Dee. But she answered anyway, her voice coated in steel. "Because she loved you enough not to drag you into a world that would get you killed." "Victor Darrow died in prison last year," she added. Lily had no idea. She'd spent so long looking over her shoulder she didn't believe the shadows were ever gone. She never came back because she thought Adrian had moved on. Pictures of him in suits, on magazine covers, with models and moguls. She didn't want to be his weakness. She wanted to be his memory. But life had different plans. After Victor died, the money from the shelters dried up. The people who once protected her moved on to other cases. She refused to come to Adrian, not out of pride, but because she feared he would see her as a burden. And still, she walked those streets every day, hoping her children might see a version of life beyond what she could give them. She begged not for herself, but for them. Adrian drove back in silence, rage coiled tightly beneath his ribs, not at Lily, but at the world that forced her to choose survival over love. He had been living in penthouses while his children slept on floors. He'd spent millions on campaigns and causes, never knowing the cause that mattered most was holding a cardboard sign 2 blocks from where he signed his last acquisition. The shame was suffocating. He called a private investigator before the sun rose. Not to dig up dirt, but to confirm every detail. Medical records, DNA, anything that could tell him how much he had missed. He needed facts, but more than that, he needed time. Time to undo a silence that had lasted too long. The next morning, he walked by the same corner, but Lily wasn't there. Just an old man holding a cup with shaking hands. Adrian handed him 100 without looking and walked on. Because now he knew the truth. She didn't leave him. She saved him. And in doing so, she'd damned herself. But not for much longer. Not if he had anything to say about it. The next time Adrian saw Lily, it wasn't from the protective cocoon of a luxury sedan. It was with his shoes scraping against the same concrete where she'd stood, weather-worn and exposed to the indifference of strangers. She was sitting on a bench near the underpass with both children huddled beside her, trying to read from a donated book that had half its pages torn. Her hair was pulled back into a messy knot, and her fingers trembled as she turned each page, not from the cold, but from the constant strain of pretending to be unshaken. Adrian approached slowly, without entourage or designer coat, dressed simply, with his palms visible, like a man trying not to scare a wild animal. He knew enough now not to assume his presence would bring comfort. When Lily looked up, her eyes flickered with the reflex of escape. But then she squinted, confused by what she saw. He looked different, older, worn in a way that had nothing to do with wealth. The man before her wasn't the boy who dreamed of running away. He was someone she didn't know how to face. "Lily," he said again, more softly this time. Her mouth parted, but no words came. The children tensed at her side, unsure whether to run or stay still. She stood up slowly, positioning herself between him and them. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, heavy with exhaustion and edge. Adrian's throat tightened. How could he explain he didn't come to take anything, but to return everything she had lost? He hesitated before answering. "To talk. That's all. No cameras. No press. Just us." Lily didn't respond immediately. She studied him for a long time, trying to see through the layers of time and transformation. Eventually, she nodded toward the children. "Not here. Not in front of them." He followed her a block away to a soup kitchen parking lot where silence lingered like fog between them. She crossed her arms, shivering slightly, still on guard. "I'm not your responsibility, Adrian. You don't owe me anything." The words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they were untrue. He did owe her everything. "You saved my life," he said plainly. "And I let myself believe you abandoned me." For the first time, she flinched. He saw a flicker of the old Lily then, the one who used to cry when people accused her of things she didn't do, the one who once believed love could outlast fear. "I had no choice," she murmured, staring at the ground. "I know now," he replied. "Dee told me. I know about Victor. About the threats. About the kids." At the mention of the name, her eyes widened, and she turned her back to him, wrapping her arms around herself as if bracing for an impact that never came. "He's dead, Lily. You don't have to hide anymore." Those words should have brought relief, but instead, she collapsed onto the low brick wall behind her and buried her face in her hands. "You think it just goes away? The fear? The shame?" she said through trembling fingers. "I've lived a decade waiting for the sound of footsteps behind me. I've taught my kids not to speak to strangers, not to trust a soul, because I didn't know if one day you'd show up with hate in your eyes for the family you never knew you had." Adrian sat beside her, not touching, but close enough to remind her he was real. "I don't hate you," he said. "I hated the silence. I hated myself for believing you were capable of leaving me. But never you." They sat in stillness for a long time, cars passing like ghosts. Finally, Lily turned to him, her voice barely audible. "What now? You're rich. I'm broken. We don't fit anymore." Adrian didn't answer right away. He stared ahead, at the wall stained by rain and neglect, before replying. "I don't want to fix you, Lily. I want to understand you. And maybe help where I should have been all along." Her face twisted with something between relief and resistance. "I don't want charity," she said. "Then don't take charity," he replied. "Take a second chance." But it wasn't that simple. Lily had lived too long making decisions for survival, not comfort. She didn't want his pity. She wanted control over what came next, for her and the kids. "They're all I have," she said. Everything I do is for them. I'd rather sleep in the street than let them think I sold our dignity for a bed. That was when Adrian realized helping her wasn't about money, it was about power. He couldn't just offer shelter or food or a bank account. He had to give her agency, something no one had offered her in years. He stood slowly. Then let me give you something else, he said. Not charity. Not a handout. A platform. Let me use my resources to build something with you. Not for you. With you. Lily didn't say yes. But she didn't say no either. And as she stood and walked back toward her children, he noticed the way her shoulders straightened just slightly, as if a burden had lightened, even if only by a fraction. That night, as he watched her lead the twins into a shelter one more time, he knew that offering her safety was only the first step. Restoring her autonomy would take far more. But for the first time, Adrian wasn't just a man haunted by the past. He was a man willing to stand in it, confront it, and reshape the future, not only for himself, but for the woman who once vanished to protect him and the children who deserved a life their mother never had. The headlines were already buzzing before Adrian stepped onto the stage. Invitations had been sent to the city's most powerful elites, journalists, investors, and leaders in philanthropy. Everyone expected the unveiling of a new tech-driven charitable foundation. Yet another corporate social responsibility campaign branded with Adrian Hayes' signature precision and charm. The venue gleamed with opulence, floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the skyline, a string quartet playing softly beneath crystal chandeliers, and every seat occupied by people who had, in one way or another, profited from Adrian's rise. Cameras were set, live streams running, and press releases drafted. But no one knew what he was about to say. No one imagined the real reason he had gathered them. Because this wasn't about press or profits. It was about truth. About atonement. About rewriting a story that had for too long only been told from one side. Adrian stepped up to the podium in a navy suit, not the custom-tailored armor he usually wore, but something simpler. His tie was missing. His sleeves slightly wrinkled. He didn't smile. His voice, when it came, was quieter than expected, forcing the room to still itself and lean in. You've all come here expecting a typical announcement, he began, scanning the room with eyes colder than marble but more human than they'd ever seen. But this isn't about tech. Or innovation. It's about something older than code. Something I've never spoken publicly about until today. A ripple of confusion stirred through the crowd. Phones lowered. Eyebrows lifted. Before I became the man you know, I was a boy with nothing. No father. No safety. Just one person who believed in me. Her name was Lily. The room shifted. The name didn't register at first. She gave me everything when I had nothing. She saved me when I didn't know I needed saving. And then she disappeared. A pause. A breath. For years, I thought she abandoned me. I built this entire empire trying to fill the space she left behind. But I was wrong. She didn't leave me. She was taken from me by circumstance, by fear, by violence. And she spent the last decade hiding, protecting not just herself, but me. Now the room was silent. Not out of boredom, but disbelief. Adrian reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded photograph. He held it up for a second, an old image of him and Lily at 17, standing in front of the train yard, eyes full of defiance and fire. He set it down. She reappeared weeks ago. Not in a boardroom. Not in some elegant reunion. But on the street. With 2 children. My children. The gasp that swept through the crowd was audible. People whispered to one another, trying to process what he had just said. Adrian didn't flinch. They were mine. And I never knew. Because I didn't look hard enough. Because I let my anger blind me. The weight of his words hung heavy in the air. This empire, the deals, the buildings, the foundations, it's all built on a hollow base if I can't admit where it came from. Lily was the source of my strength. She was my reason. And I owe her everything. He stepped back slightly from the mic. Then did something no one expected. He invited Lily on stage. Cameras scrambled. Journalists snapped to attention. From the side curtain, Lily stepped out, not in a designer dress or styled for public approval, but in a modest blouse and second-hand shoes. Her hair was brushed, her posture upright, but her eyes were cautious. The crowd didn't applaud. They were too stunned. Adrian reached out and took her hand, not as a statement, but as a bridge. "This is not a publicity stunt," he continued. "This is a reparation, a recognition, and a redirection." He then turned to the press. "Effective immediately, I'm appointing Lily as co-chair of the Hayes Foundation. She will have complete authority to direct all programs related to housing insecurity, domestic violence support, and single-parent resources. She's not just a mother. She's a survivor. She knows what the world looks like when no one listens. And I trust her to lead where I failed to see." Lily didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her very presence, standing beside the man who once promised her a new life, now offering her a share of the legacy he'd built, said more than any speech could. The room broke into murmurs. Some were confused, others skeptical, but most were moved. One reporter stood and asked, "Why now? Why reveal this in front of everyone?" Adrian looked at him and replied without hesitation, "Because silence built my walls, and only truth can tear them down." It wasn't just a revelation. It was a reckoning. He wasn't just reclaiming the woman he'd lost. He was reclaiming the humanity he had buried to become someone the world respected but no longer recognized in the mirror. And for the first time, as Lily walked off the stage beside him, he didn't feel like a man who had everything to lose. He felt like a man who had just begun to understand what it meant to have something worth keeping. After the press conference, the world erupted with speculation, praise, and skepticism. Social media hailed Adrian as a changed man, a corporate king who finally stepped down from his marble throne to walk among the people he once ignored. News outlets scrambled to reframe his narrative, not as a mogul, but as a man reclaiming the pieces of himself long buried beneath profit margins and spotless spreadsheets. But behind the headlines, in the quiet spaces away from flashing cameras and glossy articles, Adrian and Lily sat at a kitchen table in a small apartment he had rented for her and the children. Not in the city's elite towers, but in a modest, safe neighborhood with a fenced-in garden and a public school 2 blocks away. He offered her the mansion. She refused it. She wanted walls that felt earned, not inherited. It was the first lesson he learned from her all over again. Dignity isn't built with gold, it's built with truth. Adrian didn't return to the CEO's chair. That decision wasn't just symbolic, it was permanent. He appointed a new leadership team and redirected his energy into the foundation he now co-chaired with Lily. And while many assumed she would act as a silent figurehead, they were quickly corrected. Lily was fierce. Strategic. She spoke in meetings with precision and fire, challenging policy ideas, refusing watered-down initiatives, and insisting that aid didn't just reach people, but restored them. She knew what it meant to go hungry in a city where restaurants threw out food nightly. She knew what it meant to sleep with one eye open, fearing a knock that might end everything. Under her guidance, the foundation launched projects no one had dared attempt, housing initiatives run by formerly homeless women, trauma clinics for abuse survivors that focused not just on safety but on rebuilding self-worth, and a scholarship fund, named after her late brother, for children born into silence like hers had been. Adrian became a quiet figure in all of it. He listened more than he spoke. He learned to sit with discomfort, to acknowledge the blind spots he had allowed to exist for years. But he never stepped away from Lily's side, not out of guilt or obligation, but something deeper, redemption. The children, Emma and Jacob, warmed to him slowly. They didn't care about his billions. They cared that he remembered their favorite breakfast, that he read to them at night, that he didn't flinch when they cried. Emma once asked him if he was their dad because he looked too serious. Jacob said he talked like a man from the news. But one day, without prompting, they both crawled into his lap and called him Dad. He didn't cry in front of them. But when they fell asleep, he locked himself in the bathroom and let 20 years of buried emotion finally rise. But even as he rebuilt what he'd lost, time was not on their side. Lily had been coughing for weeks. At first, she blamed the cold weather, the stress. But doctors confirmed what Adrian couldn't bear to hear: late-stage pulmonary fibrosis, likely worsened by years of untreated infections, exposure to damp shelters, and a body that had endured more than it ever should have. She never told him right away. She wanted to give him time to become a father without the weight of loss hanging over them. When she finally did tell him, they were sitting in the garden, the kids playing nearby, and she placed her hand over his and said quietly, "I didn't come back to be saved. I came back to make sure they were seen." Adrian didn't collapse. He didn't rage. He simply nodded, kissed her hand, and promised one thing, that her legacy would not be a eulogy, but a movement. In the months that followed, Lily's health declined, but her spirit burned brighter than ever. She gave speeches from a wheelchair, testified before policymakers, and designed programs that would live on long after her body gave out. And then, on a quiet Sunday morning, she passed away in her sleep. No hospitals. No machines. Just peace. Adrian sat by her side for hours after, holding her hand, whispering thank yous she'd never hear, and apologies he hoped she'd always known were real. At her memorial, Adrian didn't wear black. He wore the same shirt he'd worn the day he met her, the only piece of his past he'd ever kept. He told the story no one had heard, their first kiss behind the train yard, the promise to run away, the way her laughter once made him believe in magic. He ended with a declaration, the Lily Grace Initiative. A global platform dedicated to transforming lives through radical empathy, built not on pity, but on shared power. Every program would be run by people who lived the life they were trying to change. And its first two ambassadors, Emma and Jacob. Not as heirs, but as advocates. Children once born in hiding, now leading with pride. The final moment came in private. Adrian took the journal he had long thought destroyed, the one they'd written in as teens, and placed it into her casket. Except it wasn't the old one. It was a new version, recreated from memory and filled with updated sketches. Drawings of the house she'd designed for women's shelters, outlines of education systems she wanted to reform, and on the final page, a hand-drawn image of her, Emma, Jacob, and himself, standing together in front of a house with light in every window. He whispered, "You didn't vanish, Lily. You became everything." And as the lid closed, a chapter did too, not an ending, but a transformation. What he did next wasn't just shocking. It was revolutionary. He didn't build a statue or a shrine. He built a world where no one like her would ever have to disappear again.